The courtroom was quiet in a way that made people uncomfortable. Not the ordinary silence that comes when a judge enters, but the kind that settles after something final has already happened. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk. The American flag stood motionless in the corner. The divorce decree lay signed, stamped, and complete. And still no one moved. At the center of the room stood Claire Whitman. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't even look surprised. At 32, Claire looked smaller than she had years ago, as if life had carefully shaved away parts of her, without leaving scars anyone could point to. She wore a simple navy coat, slightly worn at the sleeves, and flat shoes that clicked softly against the courthouse floor. Her hands were folded in front of her, steady, controlled. Across from her stood Ethan Whitman, her husband of 9 years, now her ex. Ethan looked relieved. His posture was loose, his shoulders relaxed, the faintest trace of a smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. The divorce had gone exactly the way he expected. Clean, efficient, favorable. He had kept the house, the accounts, the business interests. Claire had accepted a modest settlement and signed without resistance. That part confused people. Usually someone fights. Usually there are tears. Usually there is anger. But Claire had said only 2 words when the judge asked if she accepted the terms. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge had paused, studying her for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded and finalized the decree. The gavel struck once. Sharp. Final. Divorce granted. Ethan exhaled as if he'd been holding his breath for months. As the courtroom began to empty, his lawyer leaned toward him and whispered, "That was easier than expected." Ethan smirked. She always knew when to give up. Claire heard him. She didn't react. She simply turned and walked out. Outside, the courthouse steps were busy with people coming and going, but Claire moved through them as if wrapped in glass. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. Her phone buzzed once in her coat pocket. She didn't check it. Ethan followed minutes later, laughing quietly into his phone as he spoke to someone on the other end. "It's done," he said. "No drama, no mess. I told you, she didn't have it in her to fight." He glanced across the street just in time to see Claire step into a cab. She didn't look at him. The cab pulled away. For Ethan, that was the end of the story. For Claire, it was only the beginning. 3 days later, something happened that no one, including Ethan, could have predicted. At a small regional airport just outside Manhattan, air traffic was briefly rerouted to make space for a private arrival. Ground staff moved quickly. Security tightened. A sleek black Gulfstream G700 descended onto the runway, its engines humming with quiet authority. The tail bore no company logo, only a discreet registration number. People noticed anyway. Jets like that didn't land there by accident. As the aircraft taxied to a stop, the cabin door opened. A man in his late 50s stepped out first. Tall, composed, dressed in understated luxury. Behind him came a woman. Claire Whitman. She looked different. Not louder, not richer, just untethered. Her posture was straighter. Her expression calm in a way that didn't come from relief, but from certainty. The man beside her placed a protective hand at her back as they descended the stairs together. A waiting car door opened. And in that moment, though, no cameras were present, no announcements made. The balance of everything that had happened in that courtroom began to shift. Because the man who had arrived with Claire wasn't a lawyer, he wasn't a friend, and he wasn't there by coincidence. He was Daniel Hargrove, a billionaire industrialist whose name quietly moved markets, whose private jet rarely landed anywhere without reason. And Claire hadn't met him 3 days after her divorce. She had known him her entire life. What Ethan didn't know, what the court hadn't known, was that Claire's silence wasn't resignation. It was timing. And the jet wasn't a rescue. It was a reveal. Claire Whitman had once believed in building a life slowly. She met Ethan Whitman when she was 21, during her final year at a small liberal arts college in Vermont. He was older, confident, ambitious, already talking about startups and investments while everyone else was still trying to pass exams. He noticed her because she didn't compete for attention. She listened. She asked thoughtful questions. She remembered details. Ethan mistook that for admiration. Their early relationship felt balanced. Ethan talked about the future. Claire made it feel possible. When they married 3 years later, it wasn't flashy. A simple ceremony. Close friends. Families scattered across the lawn of a rented estate. Ethan promised her partnership. He promised transparency. He promised that whatever he built, they would own. Together. For a while, that seemed true. Ethan's company grew quickly, faster than either of them had expected. Small tech acquisitions turned into larger deals. Investors came and went. Claire handled the invisible work, scheduling, legal paperwork, internal coordination. She never put her name on anything. She didn't ask to. Ethan liked being the face. The first crack appeared quietly. A comment here. A dismissal there. Ethan started referring to the business as mine instead of ours. He grew impatient when Claire asked questions. He accused her of being overly cautious, too conservative, too slow. "You don't understand how this world works," he told her once. "You grew up sheltered." Claire didn't argue. She had grown up differently, but not sheltered. Her father, Daniel Hargrove, believed in privacy. He believed wealth should move quietly. Claire had never used his name. Not once. He had taught her that power worked best when it didn't announce itself. Ethan never asked. As the years passed, Ethan's success amplified his ego. He traveled more, stayed out later, began making decisions without consulting Claire. When she expressed concern, he framed it as insecurity. "You don't trust me," he said. Claire trusted him less, not because of infidelity, but because of carelessness. Then the emotional distance became physical. Ethan stopped coming home regularly. He spent nights at networking events. Claire learned not to wait up. She learned not to ask. When she finally confronted him, calmly, directly, he didn't deny it. "I've outgrown this marriage," he said, "and you've let yourself disappear." The words stayed with her. Within weeks, the divorce papers arrived. Ethan offered terms quickly, generous enough to look fair, limited enough to protect everything that mattered to him. Claire read them carefully. She asked no questions. She signed. Her lawyer tried to intervene. "This is not balanced," he said. "You're entitled to more." Claire closed the folder. "I know. Then why accept it? Because timing mattered. Because speaking now would only complicate what was already in motion. Because Ethan still believed she had nothing left." The silence unsettled her lawyer. It unsettled her friends. It unsettled even the judge. But Claire understood something they didn't. There were conversations happening elsewhere. Phone calls Ethan would never hear. Documents moving through offices he'd never enter. A plan that didn't require his permission. 3 days after the divorce, Claire received a message. Just one sentence. "Are you ready?" And she didn't hesitate. Yes. The jet wasn't a surprise. It was a signal, not of rescue, but of transition. Because Claire hadn't lost anything in that courtroom. She had simply stopped pretending. And Ethan's confidence, so loud, so visible, was built on an assumption that was about to collapse. Ethan Whitman woke up the morning after the divorce feeling lighter than he had in years. The house was quiet, too quiet, but he welcomed it. No careful conversations, no unspoken expectations, no one watching him measure his words. He stood in the kitchen, coffee in hand, scrolling through messages from friends congratulating him on handling things cleanly. That was the phrase everyone used. Cleanly. He replayed the courtroom in his mind with satisfaction. Claire's silence. Her quicker agreement. The way she walked out without even a backward glance. It confirmed everything he believed about her. That when things became difficult, she withdrew. That she lacked the instinct to fight. By noon, Ethan was already planning the next chapter of his life. He called his realtor about listing the guest house. He messaged an investor about accelerating a pending deal. He even joked with a colleague about finally being free of dead weight. Across the city, Claire was experiencing something very different. She sat alone in a quiet hotel room, phone turned face down on the nightstand, staring out at the skyline. The city looked the same as it always had, busy, indifferent, but she felt like she was standing on the edge of something irreversible. The silence she had carried through the divorce wasn't numbness. It was restraint. She thought about the years she had minimized herself to fit Ethan's comfort, the way she had allowed her work to remain invisible, the way she had protected him from consequences even when she shouldn't have. That realization hurt more than the divorce itself, because it meant she had helped build the version of him that eventually discarded her. When the black car arrived downstairs, Claire didn't hesitate. She took one last look at the room, anonymous, temporary, and left without regret. The jet's arrival was supposed to be discreet, but discretion, when paired with scale, tends to attract attention anyway. At the private terminal, staff recognized Daniel Hargrove immediately. They didn't greet him with enthusiasm. They greeted him with efficiency. Phones were put away. Doors opened quickly. Clearances were handled without quaestio. Claire followed him inside. No announcements were made. No press was called. And yet, within hours, the ripple began. An aviation enthusiast posted a photo online of the jet on the tarmac. A financial blogger recognized the registration number. A quiet rumor surfaced on an industry forum. Hargrove landed in New York unexpectedly. Ethan saw it that evening. He was halfway through dinner with a colleague when the headline flashed across his screen. "Why is Daniel Hargrove in Manhattan?" He frowned. The name meant something to him, not personally but professionally. Hargrove Capital was legendary for moving quietly, for reshaping industries without spectacle. Ethan had pitched one of their subsidiaries years ago and never gotten a response. He didn't connect it to Claire. Not yet. Across town, Claire sat in a private office overlooking the river. The room smelled faintly of leather and old books. Daniel Hargrove stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. "You don't have to do this," he said gently. "You never did." Claire shook her head. "I know, but I needed to finish it my way." He turned to her. "And are you ready for what comes next?" She met his gaze. "I've been ready for years." That night, a series of emails went out. Nothing dramatic, nothing aggressive. Just confirmations, transfers, meetings scheduled, decisions finalized that had been waiting for one last variable to resolve. The divorce had been that variable. Ethan noticed the change the next morning. A deal he'd been confident about stalled without explanation. A partner postponed a call. An email he expected a quick response to remained unanswered. By afternoon, he was irritated. By evening, he was uneasy. He checked his phone again, rereading the headline about Hargrove's arrival. This time, something about it bothered him. Not the name, but the timing. 3 days after his divorce, he dismissed the thought. Coincidences happened. Claire, meanwhile, slept better than she had in months, not because she felt victorious, but because she felt aligned. There was no more pretending, no more shrinking. The emotional hell she had endured, the isolation, the quiet erosion of self-worth, had not broken her. It had clarified her, and the world around her was beginning to respond. Ethan still believed he had won, but for the first time the certainty wavered. By the 4th day after the divorce, Ethan Whitman could no longer ignore the pattern. At first he told himself it was coincidence. Markets fluctuated. Deals stalled. People got busy. But by midweek, the silence from his contacts had grown too loud to dismiss. A meeting he had personally scheduled weeks in advance was postponed indefinitely. A funding round that was supposed to close suddenly required additional review. An assistant forwarded him a message from a legal team requesting clarification on ownership structures, questions no one had ever asked him before. Ethan stared at his screen, irritation curling into unease. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. He called his business partner, Mark, expecting reassurance. Instead, Mark sounded distracted. "Ethan," he said carefully, "have you seen the news?" "What news?" Ethan snapped. There was a pause on the line. "Hargrove Capital announced a restructuring this morning," Mark said. "They're reviewing indirect partnerships across multiple sectors." Ethan's stomach tightened. "And?" he asked. "And," Mark continued, "your company is on the list for reassessment." Ethan laughed, sharp and defensive. "We've never even worked with them." "That's not what reassessment means," Mark replied. "It means someone with leverage is looking closely." The call ended with no reassurance. That afternoon, Ethan received a calendar invite from a law firm he didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Clarification meeting, urgent." He didn't attend. Across the city, Claire sat at a long conference table, hands folded, listening as professionals spoke around her. Not at her, but to her. Legal counsel, financial analysts, advisors who had known her father for decades. People who treated her presence not as symbolic, but as necessary. She spoke when needed. She listened when it mattered. Daniel Hargrove watched quietly. "You're calm," he observed. "I've already survived the hardest part," Claire replied. The truth was she felt lighter, not because power had shifted, but because she was no longer hiding from it. By evening, speculation had spread. Industry insiders began connecting dots: the private jet, the timing, the quiet reappearance of Daniel Hargrove in New York. Whispers circulated, first cautiously, then with confidence. Ethan overheard it at a networking event. Two men stood behind him, unaware of his presence. "I heard Hargrove's daughter just finalized a divorce," one said. "No kidding," the other replied. "That explains the jet." Ethan froze. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Hargrove's daughter. The words echoed. He turned slowly, heart pounding, but the men had already moved. Ed on. Ethan left the event without saying goodbye. At home, he paced, replaying every conversation he had ever had with Claire, every unanswered question, every time she had deflected curiosity about her family. He remembered her saying once, casually, "My father prefers privacy." He had never asked more. Now, for the first time, the silence he once dismissed felt deliberate. He searched online. Daniel Hargrove, net worth, family. The results were sparse, but one line stood out: survived by one daughter. Ethan sat down heavily. "No," he whispered. His phone buzzed. A message from his lawyer. "We need to talk. Immediately." Across town, Claire stood on a balcony overlooking the city lights. The air was cool, the noise distant. She wasn't watching Ethan's world unravel, not directly. She didn't need to. She had accepted the divorce in silence because she knew noise would distract from what mattered. Because timing had always been the difference between reaction and consequence. And now the consequences were finally aligning. Ethan had won the courtroom, but outside it, far beyond its walls, the rules were different. And he was just beginning to realize how unprepared he was. Ethan's lawyer didn't waste time. They met that night in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city. The skyline glittered, indifferent to the tension building inside. Ethan sat stiffly, jacket still on, fingers tapping against the table as if movement alone could keep panic at bay. "Tell me this is nothing," Ethan said. His lawyer, a seasoned man who rarely showed emotion, didn't answer right away. He slid a folder across the table instead. "This," he said carefully, "isn't nothing." Ethan opened it. Inside were public filings, corporate disclosures, and a brief summary prepared by a private intelligence firm, something his lawyer had commissioned hours earlier. At the top of the page was a name he now recognized too well: Daniel Hargrove. The lawyer spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. "Hargrove Capital has initiated a review of several companies indirectly tied to their supply chain and investment ecosystem. Your firm is one of them." Ethan scoffed weakly. "We don't do business with them." "You do," the lawyer replied, "through intermediaries. And those intermediaries answer to Hargrove." Ethan felt his mouth go dry. The lawyer continued. "More importantly, your ex-wife is Daniel Hargrove's sole heir." The words landed with a dull finality. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Images rushed through his mind. Claire's calm in court, her silence, the way she hadn't negotiated. He had assumed weakness. He had assumed wrong. "She never told me," he said. The lawyer nodded. That was intentional. The next morning, Ethan tried damage control. He called investors. He left messages. He sent emails that went unanswered. When replies did come, they were polite, distant, non-committal. By noon, one of his board members resigned. By evening, a pending acquisition was suspended. The jet appeared again the following day. This time, it landed at a private airfield closer to the city, visible, unmistakable. Photos circulated online. Industry watchers speculated openly now. And then came the confirmation. A quiet press release. Hargrove Capital announces strategic oversight of Whitman Holdings. Ethan read it 3 times, hoping he had misunderstood. Claire's name wasn't mentioned. It didn't need to be. Across the city, Claire sat in a meeting room as the announcement went live. She didn't smile. She didn't react at all. She listened as advisors discussed timelines and next steps. Daniel watched her closely. "You understand," he said. "This will be seen as retaliation." Claire met his gaze. "It's accountability." That afternoon, Ethan finally did what pride had stopped him from doing sooner. He called Claire. The phone rang longer than he expected. When she answered, her voice was calm. "Yes?" "Claire," he said quickly, "we need to talk." There was a pause. "I don't think we do," she replied. "You didn't tell me who you were," he said, the accusation slipping out before he could stop it. "I told you exactly who I was," Claire said. "You just never listened." Ethan swallowed. "Is this about the divorce?" "No," she replied. "This is about choices." He tried again. "You're destroying everything I built." Claire's tone didn't change. "You built it assuming no consequences." Silence followed. Finally, Ethan spoke, quieter now. "What do you want?" Claire thought for a moment. "I want nothing from you," she said. "That's the part you still don't understand." The call ended. Ethan stared at his phone long after the screen went dark. For the first time it was clear. The jet hadn't arrived to save Claire. It had arrived to restore balance. And Ethan was no longer in control of the story he thought he'd finished in that courtroom. By the end of the week, Ethan Whitman's name no longer carried the same weight. It wasn't that people openly rejected him. That would have been easier to fight. Instead, doors closed quietly. Meetings were rescheduled. Emails were answered by assistants instead of executives. Calls went straight to voicemail. Control didn't vanish overnight. It thinned. Ethan sat in his office late one evening, staring at a spreadsheet he could no longer make sense of. Numbers that once reassured him now felt unstable, as if they might rearrange themselves the moment he looked away. His phone buzzed again. Another notification from his lawyer. "We need to prepare for regulatory review." Ethan rubbed his temples. This wasn't what he had imagined when he walked out of the courthouse smiling. Meanwhile, the narrative outside continued to evolve. Business media began asking careful questions. Not accusatory yet, but curious. Why was Hargrove Capital suddenly interested in Whitman Holdings? Why now? Why after years of silence? Analysts speculated. Bloggers connected timelines. A few mentioned Ethan's recent divorce, though none named Claire directly. Still, the implication hovered. In private, the pressure intensified. A compliance officer requested documents dating back 5 years. A junior partner flagged irregularities Ethan had once waved off as temporary solutions. What had been manageable in the shadows felt dangerous under scrutiny. Ethan's confidence, once effortless, began to fracture. He snapped at employees. He cancelled meetings. He spent nights awake, replaying conversations, wondering when exactly he had lost the advantage. Across town, Claire's days were steady, structured, intentional. She didn't attend public events. She didn't give interviews. She didn't correct assumptions or clarify rumors. Her role, remained quiet, but unmistakable. When she entered a room now, people stood, not because she demanded it, because they understood what she represented. Daniel Hargrove observed from a distance. He had built his empire the same way, by allowing others to underestimate silence. "You're doing well," he told her one afternoon. Claire nodded. "I'm doing what I should have done sooner." At the end of the month, Ethan received the letter he had been dreading, a formal notice of review. It wasn't an indictment, not yet, but it signaled that his past decisions, once protected by momentum and confidence, were now open to inspection. His lawyer was honest. "This doesn't end quickly," he said. "And it doesn't end quietly." Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I thought I won," he said. The lawyer paused. "You won the divorce, not the aftermath." That night, Ethan stood alone in his house, the one he had fought to keep. It felt larger now, colder, empty in a way that no amount of success could fill. He thought of Claire. Not with anger, but with something closer to regret. She had walked away without demanding anything, and somehow that had cost him everything. Across the city, Claire closed her laptop and stepped onto her balcony. The city lights shimmered below. Somewhere in the distance, a plane crossed the sky, just a blinking trail of motion against the dark. She didn't look for it. She didn't need to. The jet had done its job, and the consequences were still unfolding. The first headline Ethan saw was the one he couldn't undo. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't cruel. That somehow made it worse. Whitman Holdings under formal review following strategic oversight shift. The article was careful, neutral in language, but devastating in implication. Analysts quoted unnamed sources. Legal experts discussed patterns of risk. The comment section filled quickly, not with outrage, but with speculation. Speculation was dangerous. Ethan sat at his desk, the screen glowing in the dim office, reading every word as if repetition might soften the blow. He told himself this was temporary. Reviews happened, oversight shifted, companies survived worse. But his phone told a different story. A long-time client terminated their contract pending clarification. A board member requested an emergency vote. His banker stopped returning calls. Momentum, the thing Ethan had relied on more than strategy, was gone. At the emergency board meeting, the atmosphere was restrained but cold. No raised voices, no accusations, just distance. "We need stability," one member said. "We need confidence," said another. "And right now," a third added. "We have neither." Ethan tried to argue. He spoke about vision, about long-term plans, about misunderstandings that would resolve themselves. But the room wasn't listening the way it used to. By the end of the meeting, he was asked to step aside temporarily. The word temporary echoed in his head as he packed up his office that evening. He carried a single box to his car, papers he didn't need, objects that suddenly felt meaningless. Across the city, Claire read the same article. She didn't feel satisfaction. She felt closure, not because Ethan was losing, but because the imbalance that had defined their marriage was finally gone. He no longer stood above consequences, shielded by confidence and noise. Silence had removed that shield. Claire attended a private dinner that evening, small, intentional. People spoke to her with respect, not curiosity. No one asked about the divorce. No one mentioned Ethan. They discussed future projects, philanthropic initiatives, long-term investments. She belonged in the room. Ethan, meanwhile, stood in his empty house again, scrolling through old photos on his phone. Vacations, events, smiles that now looked rehearsed. He stopped on one image, Claire standing beside him at a conference years earlier, calm, composed, slightly in the background. He had thought she was hiding. Now he understood. She had been waiting. A message arrived late that night, from Claire. Just one sentence. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Ethan stared at it for a long time. For the first time, there was no response he could send that would change anything. The silence had moved from her to him, and it was heavier than he had ever imagined. The city moved. On, as it always did. Traffic filled the streets. Markets opened and closed. New headlines replaced old ones. The world did not pause for Ethan Whitman's fall, but it recorded it quietly, permanently. Weeks after stepping aside, Ethan no longer checked the news every morning. He didn't need to. The silence told him everything. Invitations stopped arriving. His phone stayed still. The version of himself that once commanded rooms had faded into someone people referenced in the past tense. He accepted it slowly, not with dignity at first, but with exhaustion. One evening he sat alone in the house he had fought so hard to keep. The rooms echoed now, not because they were empty, but because they had lost purpose. He finally understood something that had never occurred to him before. Winning isn't about taking everything. It's about knowing what you were never meant to keep. Across the city, Claire Whitman's life unfolded differently. Not louder, not richer in appearance, just clearer. She moved into a sunlit apartment overlooking the river. She kept her routines simple. Morning walks, thoughtful meetings, work that mattered. She didn't chase recognition, and because of that it found her anyway. She never gave interviews. never corrected the narrative. Those who needed to know already did. Daniel Hargrove watched with quiet pride as his daughter settled into her own authority. Not inherited, not announced, but earned through restraint. "You didn't need the jet," he said once. Claire smiled. "No, but it helped people see." Months later, Ethan saw her one final time. It was brief, unplanned, at a quiet cafe near the water. She was laughing with someone beside her. N.O.T. loudly, not performatively, just present. He didn't approach her. He didn't need to. In that moment, he understood the truth he had missed from the beginning. Claire's silence had never been weakness. It had been confidence without urgency, preparation without spectacle, power that didn't require permission. As Claire stood to leave, she caught his eye briefly. There was no anger there, no regret, only closure. She turned and walked away, and Ethan finally let her go. If you stayed until the end of this story, you already understand the lesson. Sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. Subscribe if you want more stories where patience, truth, and timing change everything. The jet never landed again. It didn't need to. Its message had already arrived.